Hello again. Welcome. So, feeling after having touched things like healing, the unity, becoming whole, feel like in this video I want to delve into reflect a bit on how to actually become more whole, how to do this healing. But I also want to call it a bit the alchemy of it, the alchemical process of it. Reflect and describe this a bit and see what appears. First thing that appears is, well, why even become whole? Why even become one? One with whom? And this is something that can rise from a process which makes us realize we are actually at war with our own self. Maybe even not truly loving our own self, thus creating or living actually, as most likely it's already there, certainly is already here in this world, a consciousness, a state of separation within our own self. There are parts of our own self which are in conflict with the other, thus not being in unity, because in unity, well, they would be at peace and loving each other in a free way, not forced. Um, so, firstly, well, like something would have to happen within ourselves to start such a journey. For me, that was maybe something like, well, I feel too shit in my current state of living back at the time. Um, I don't want to live like this anymore, which brought me to starting this kind of process of, well, why do I actually feel even like this? Why do I even let myself live like this? I think I was at the time very tied in with my environment, letting my environment live through me, living up to the standards set by my environment. But this actually, and it's interesting to touch this because I feel our society is still full of these kind of dynamics, and it is actually creating separation within the individual, which is then having consequences for the whole, because all the participants are in separation, are in conflict with themselves, or most of them. And it creates the collective form of that, of a world in separation. So, understanding this kind of dynamics, understanding our own self on an individual level, it all goes together with the collective level as well. But for now, I want to focus more on an individual one, as I would say, maybe many of us can recognize the world is a bit of a mess and the world needs healing, but you cannot really heal the world through like go and heal, um, or try to force them into some kind of situation. I feel like the most significant contribution we can actually bring to and connected with still the goal of actually healing the world is to actually start with ourselves. resolving those conflicts within ourselves. Because also, like, what would even be the or kinds of actions to which we want to bring healing to a world when we ourselves are at war. I feel this is also unconsciously going on a whole lot in the world. People shouting for peace, but they themselves are war. And so I feel truly making a change comes from actual awareness of where we actually truly stand, and thus like go within our own selves, start that healing journey. And so it gives a sort of a discovery. Also, I feel I have developed some kind of attitude which I want to reflect on, which can smoothen this kind of a healing journey, because it is certainly painful. It is really facing ourselves. It is not the most fun thing, but we can do our best to actually make it as fun as possible. We can actually avoid a whole lot of unnecessary suffering, I would say, by maybe stepping into this consciously. It is also often us ourselves who is actually creating that kind of a suffering to ourselves, but the other part of ourselves. Maybe already one fun insight. Feel like certainly a big shift can be made when we ourselves have made it very clear to ourselves, like, let's do this for real. Let's actually truly work towards learning to love ourselves, bring this peace for real. Because we can also be in some kind of states where we're sort of playing as if we are bringing peace, like not being truly serious about this. Because what I'm talking about, when we are truly serious, it then allows us to step into a state which I think of as a sort of a diplomat, a mediator, someone who is then, it's also very much an observer of our own self, neutral version of our own self. And from there, we go looking at all the different parts of ourself. Not only look at them, feel them, let them have their say. It's like we go and sit at the table with all the parts of our own self. And we ourselves, or certainly a part of ourselves, is actually stepping into that role, the mediator, the one who is holding the space for all of the different fragments of ourself. And then we can start the negotiations, the conversations, get the different parts of ourselves talking to each other, listening to each other. These different parts can often be seen as sort of different polarities, different sides, but we are sitting at the same table. Maybe realizing, maybe that also comes from realizing these different parts make up the whole of me, and currently they may be at war with each other, but we're still one, and we actually don't have to be. We can also be in peace, be actually loving. And what would my experience feel like from such a state within myself? realizing that, being truthful in such a way with ourselves, and then choosing our true self, what is best for ourselves, is that peace. It's interesting because we can also have ideas that we actually want war or want to hurt ourselves, but it's not the full self who is saying that, often the traumatic self. But also don't want to go too deep into that now. It's often, sometimes when someone is very traumatized, one part can feel really, or one fragment can feel really dominant in this whole sort of negotiation, which can really certainly um, make the peace talks a bit more difficult, a bit more complicated. That is all a bit different process depending on each unique situation. But however, there are still general things which are true for all. Things like learning to listen from one side to the other, and through that, through, it's like one side who is really trying to put itself into the other side's footsteps, or its perspective, its experience or perception of experience. And then sometimes it's a bit of a balancing, but through that it can create this kind of effect that we're actually finding some middle ground. This middle ground where we can find peace, where we can find understanding of each side, while each side can be its own. We don't have to destroy each other necessarily. It's really from a point of let them be, let them talk their talk, let them feel what there is to feel, let them show that, instead of instantly. That is the real neutral position we can take on, instead of approaching this from already having a judgmental state of you cannot be in that, you cannot be in that. Then we're forcing, and then this actually creates more resistance to this whole the peace talks. When we enter the room with our intentions of the other one is wrong, and we hold on to such beliefs, I feel like it is a lot easier when we actually come together at the table, when we are truly ready to have that peace talk, to have to find a solution together. And then it's a bit game that also helps a lot to enter such a space in a sort of often it also feels a bit to me like an adventure, a discovery of ourself, learning our own self from our own self. It's like learning that side from looking at myself from the other side, and likewise, which can open up new things. It's a true self-discovery, which is certainly can be also be very fun. But if we approach it like, not everything will be fun. Everyone is what I was saying, but not every part of our own self will be as fun to see. But that in itself is also part of the game, and actually can be shifted in having fun with that. Actually, what appears in my mind, I often, in this kind of processes, I would even say hello to myself whenever. It's like, hello, I see you. Whenever I suddenly discover a new aspect of myself. Without just a very friendly hello and I see you, or this type of a knot of acknowledgement. Maybe that is truly acknowledge that these parts are there. I feel that is very important, and then it also feels that side feels acknowledged into the whole, feels accepted into the whole, and then these things can come together, which can bring us closer to unity, to peace, to loving ourselves. But describing this in a general way, there is a lot of depth to this. What I'm thinking is how there are different, there are a whole lot of different conflicts, a whole lot of different terrains upon which we often, or layers we have to work through. It's like suddenly here there are these parts of ourselves that are at conflict. You can bring them together, have a beautiful experience of unity from that. But there are certainly many layers to work through. And as we work through more layers, we become more and more and more one with ourselves. Saying this, it makes me maybe think about Tao is also a bit of a discovery, in the sense of suddenly we're at some point in our life and we start to realize, I'm really not at a good place, don't like this experience. Turning this inward, it's like, starting to sense this conflict within me. And then if we manage to resolve this, find peace within this, we can feel good again for a while in our life. Can have new insights, do some new things. It's often this, I'm describing the bigger journey throughout our life. And then after a while, we may actually enter a new, from that space, suddenly we start to feel a new conflict arise, or like something else happens in our environment, in our experience, and this brings these new layers to the surface, which again, when we turn inwards, we can discover these parts of ourselves that are at conflict, do that kind of alchemy and unify, become more loving. And so what I'm then describing in this journey is how we slowly, layer by layer, can really work our way through becoming more one with ourselves, more loving with ourselves, which in return will actually also then make us more one with the world and make us more one with, or loving in this world, with this world. Those alchemical processes can also take place in such a form where you are starting to reflect on this kind of relationship, me as an individual and the world and my environment, and sort of feel the conflict with that. And then through reflection on that, we can find our own form which goes together with, or maybe change our environment. That can also be something. But either way, certainly feels like, from my own experience, I have now found a really nice, peaceful, loving space from which now my approach to, also notices in my reflections about a lot of things about myself, about the world, others. They've often become much more loving, become much more understanding, much more compassionate. Also towards myself, I've learned to be gentle with myself on this um, whole journey. What I also think is something, sometimes we can feel a bit as if it never ends, which is actually maybe true, but at the same time it ends and begins on a new layer. As we move through the layers, we can ourselves put an end to a certain layer by moving through that. But what I'm trying to point at here is certainly there can be also eventually, or like it's a maturing. I'm thinking about initially maybe it's like, oh, you suddenly become a bit aware of yourself. You discover I'm in conflict with myself. I'm gonna solve this right now. You enter it a bit naive and a bit forcing yourself, maybe even. And then figuring out that layer and you feel whole at the time, you feel loving. Then you think you're there, think you have arrived, and when we then step into or discover the next layer, the fall from that can feel painful. And what I'm trying to point at, we can find a balance within ourselves so we don't have to fall that way. Through, for example, learning to accept, learning to realize I may feel high, feel very happy now, but life keeps moving. Things keep changing, and that's okay. Learning to accept both your highs and your lows, but stepping out of that kind of attaching to the highs or whatever because it makes your lows so much deeper or more painful because then you have lost your high. It is very different experience when you are experiencing your high while you are at the same time knowing like now I'm feeling high, feeling very happy, joyous. Um, but I know this also will most likely balance itself out again. And then I also actually maybe even want this because I see the bigger purpose that these kind of cycles bring. And that's how life moves, that's how our own consciousness moves. And that's why we maybe call accepting this, learning to be at peace with this, learning to love this, maturing. That is certainly something I've been growing in recently, or finding a deeper acceptance with life itself and really loving and being able to find a state within myself that is then able to also face any storm that comes my way. First time you're in a storm, you may be thinking, my whole world is collapsing. This will never go away. But after having gone through many storms, it's like the other ones have passed and I made it through. Might as well make it through this one, and you become more calm, more stable within yourself. But also just a general acceptance to life and learning to well, when I say acceptance, we can maybe also ask the question and think again in this alchemical type of setting. It's interesting to think in this way. What makes us not accept? And then reflect on ourselves in that way. And often it came from like, oh, it's actually me who is trying to force life in a certain thing. But from true deep self reflection, I've then realized how life is actually bringing what I truly want. Even though at the moment it brings it to me, I may not always enjoy it that much. But just that kind of a wisdom that it is actually sometimes, or the feeling of a blessing in disguise. Something weird happens in our reality which we initially don't really understand. Again, this comes from wisdom, from having done a lot of healing of things that happened in my own life, and then afterwards now I can say they actually truly feel like gifts, where at the same time honoring at the time that these things happened, They certainly didn't feel like gifts. But this gives us a wisdom that life works in such a way that we are, in our perception, in our consciousness, limited in ourselves. It is opening up a sort of a game or attitude towards life itself to, but a deeper trust, from a deeper trust that life is actually really good and wants the best for us as well. That is the culmination from, I guess, alchemizing this relationship, a relationship with life itself. Negotiating and healing, talking or conversing, talking with those parts of myself which didn't feel like life is actually a blessing, or feeling maybe a little bit like a victim by life, or like, why is this happening to me, those kind of perspectives. But then also learning to see and reflecting on experiences of, I'm actually really glad these things happened to me. Certainly seeing what it actually brought me, how it helped me grow, and I find a lot of value in that. And with that, it then learned me, taught me, I have learned to love life, love the growing, the alchemical healing process, which, even though I feel at peace and I feel loving now, in some way you can always still find the next layer. And to me, maybe in my experience, this may be now really in this kind of a layer of becoming much more an active participant in the actual physical world through making this. Feel like there is now a domain where my growth is happening. And so a lot of new things to explore and discover and probably face. But I'm looking forward to this. I'm actually having fun with this because I've learned to really love this journey. And also that seems to come from the conflict within me of what do I actually want to do. And I feel this is what I've found to really enjoy. So feel that is enough for this video. Have a good one.